This is Coleman Connolly Duncan of Catskill, who served in the U.S. Army from April 14, 1942 to 1959. This interview is taking place in the Samuel S. Stratton VA Medical Center in Albany, New York on March 28, 2003 at 9:30 in the morning. The interview is being conducted by Kenneth and June Hunter. What is your full name and when and where were you born?
My name is Coleman Connolly Duncan. I was born in Cairo, New York, October 26, 1919.
What did you do before you entered the military service?
My father owned a meat market and I worked with him in the meat business.
And did you enlist or were you drafted?
I was drafted. I was supposed to go in January of '42, but at that time they were getting so many in that they postponed it till March, and then finally in April they called me.
And where did you enlist from? Where did you travel out of?
I went to Albany, New York for a physical, and in those days you didn't get to go home. When you passed the physical, they put you on a train. We were taken to Camp Upton, Long Island, where we were processed, given physical exams and that, inoculated with a lot of, inoculated with a lot of whatever it was for diseases. And I can't remember how long I was down there. They put us on a train, a bunch of us, and we didn't know where we were going. We finally wound up in Arkansas, and we're told we were going to organize the 6th Armored Division. And I was put in a medium tank company, and they sent me to radio school. I graduated from radio school, but being as I liked to fly and I didn't like the tanks, they were very hot, and we were training for Africa. They'd give us a canteen of water. We'd go out in the field in a tank. It was 100 degrees outside and about 150 to 200 degrees inside the tanks. And I went to they had an aviation cadet examining station I went to at the division base there. I went to there and I took a test and I passed it, and then they took me out of the Armored Force and I was sent down to Texas to San Antonio Cadet Center to become an aviation cadet. And then I took all the exams down there and passed them, and I spent 9 weeks in training there, and then I was sent to a primary flying school to be a pilot. I passed primary school. They sent me to basic flying school, flying 450 horsepower planes. I graduated flying 175 horsepower. They told me I wasn't progressing fast enough. We were washed out, and they told me I could be a liaison pilot. There was a long wait, so I decided I had passed the test to either be a bombardier or a navigator, so I took bombardiering, and I went to Childress Army Air Force Base in Texas, and I was there 18 weeks, and I passed. I got my commission as a second lieutenant and my wings as a bombardier. I also had a rating as a DR navigator and radio navigator. From there, we were sent to Salt Lake City and picked up a crew, and were sent to Biggs Field in Texas, outside of El Paso. We were put in B-24s, and we went into combat training. And just as there's a lot of deaths, we lost 75 men in training down there from accidents and that, which happen when you're flying, when you take off in the morning. It's the same with training accidents all over, which people don't realize. A lot of people get killed when they're not in combat. From there, we were sent. We went to Michigan. They gave us a new B-24, and we flew into New Hampshire to an air base there, and they told us we were going to go over the North Atlantic. I'm sorry. We had gone from Bixfield to McCook, Nebraska, to join the 493rd Bomb Group, and then from there we went to pick up this plane and a brand new B-24 heavy bomber, and we flew into Newfoundland, and from there we flew over the North Atlantic. We landed in Iceland, then they sent us to Ireland, and we picked up a plane. We picked up, there was a B-17 sent in because there were so many airfields in England. If you didn't know where you were going, you couldn't get there. So we had this B-17 guide us in, all our planes together. We flew into the air base in Debich, England, where the 493rd was stationed, and we landed. And we were there, that was in May of '44. After we were there a couple of weeks, they had us confined to the base, and we felt something was coming up, which everybody knew would have been the invasion, which would be D-Day. And June the 6th of '44, we were wakened about 3 o'clock in the morning and told to go to briefing. And we went down there, and they unveiled a map and said we were going to be, this was the invasion of Europe, and that we were going to be flying a mission to a town in France near the coast where supposedly there was German armored tanks in there, and we were to bomb the town. Of course, we don't know who we hit or anything. We didn't really get that much. There was anti-aircraft fire, but not a lot, so we got back okay. The next day, this is another story, we couldn't find the group when we took off, and we tagged on to another group, and we bombed a railroad yard in France. And we came back and we couldn't find the air base, and we had to land. We used this system they had to guide planes that got lost over England, and we got guided to this English base, and we stayed there overnight, went back to our own base the next day. And that was June the 7th. Then the weather socked in, and we didn't, although the bomb group did fly a couple of missions, our crew didn't fly any more until June the 14th, which we took off. We were bombing a German fighter base in near Lyon, France. It was one of the last fighter bases that the Germans had in France, because we bombed the other ones. And we bombed the fighter base. We got hit by flak over the target, anti-aircraft fire. Punched a few holes, although it wasn't direct hit, punched a few holes in our ship, and we were losing gas, so we broke off from the group and went down on the deck so we wouldn't be on oxygen or anything, and to conserve fuel. Of course, we lost an engine, and then the pilot decided to try to make it to the channel where the British used to pick up the survivors out of the water with their speedboats coming in from England. But we didn't make it, so the pilot told us to bail out, and I bailed out. And coming down, I realized I didn't know much about a parachute, so I could see I was going to hit a tree or something, and I evidently hit the tree. I landed on the roof of a French farmhouse, and I got knocked out, because the next thing I knew, I woke up and there's a French woman out there talking to me, and she had me propped up against the farmhouse, and I couldn't understand her, so I said she understood German, so I said, "Where are the Germans? Where are the Germans?" And she said, down there, and down there was a truckload of them coming on this road, and then the other road coming the other way, there was two soldiers on motorcycles. So they told us, the intelligence fellows told us, that to try to get cover with trees or something and cover ourselves with leaves. So I started running towards this stand of trees that were in back of the farmhouse, and I looked over my shoulder, and German officer had gotten the German soldiers out of the truck, and they fanned across the field, and the next thing I knew, I heard wing wing over my head, so I realized they weren't trying to kill me. I figured they all can't be bad shots, so I stopped. And the German officer came up to me and put a Luger in my back, and I asked him for his commander, take me to your commander, and he took me out front. They took me out to the road, and he put me in a car, in like a taxi cab, I guess it was camouflage, and he got in the back, and the driver got in the front with me, enlisted man, and the officer got in the back, and I sat in the passenger side, and we went down the road to their headquarters. They had a farmhouse they'd taken over as their headquarters, and I always remember going down that road. It was a bumpy road, and he had that Luger at the back of my head, and I thought to myself, he doesn't really want to kill me, but I hope he's got the safety on. He's going to blow my brain down. He doesn't want. When I got to their headquarters, I was ushered into this room, and I heard this officer say, I take it he was an officer, he was, say, "Lieutenant Duncan, will you come in here, please?" I went into this room, and it was an intelligence officer, a German intelligence officer. Spoke perfect English, naturally. And he asked me to fill out this Red Cross form, which, of course, I told him I give you my name, rank, and serial number. And he said, well, fill out whatever you can, because on there it says name, rank, serial number, what bomb group are you with, where they're stationed in England, all this stuff, which everybody knew was. So he didn't say anything. He was a nice guy. I asked to see my enlisted men if they'd picked them up. They said they had. So I checked them in the garage that they had them holding in there, and they said they were all right and they got something to eat. So he took me to the canteen, which is like our PXs in the American thing, and where they go for drinks and that. And I did have he gave me a bottle of beer, which tasted very good. And then that night, he said, we can't keep you here, we have to send you to another city. And I can't remember the name of the city, but I remember they put us in this prison. It was a civilian prison, which I call the Bastille. It wasn't very nice. They had rats there, and they were locked in more or less solitary confinement. And we didn't get any food. We got a piece of black bread in the morning, and a bowl of watery soup at noon, and another piece of black bread at night. I was there a couple of days, and they took us out early in the morning, this one morning, and the sun was just coming up, and I remember my tail gunner, who was only 19 years old, and he came running up to me. He said, "Lieutenant Duncan, they're going to shoot us this morning." And I said, "No, they can't do that, Frankie." And then I looked at all these German soldiers lined against this brick wall, and the officer there, and with their guns and everything. I said, "Hey, maybe I don't know too much." But actually, what it was, they were taking us. They were bringing in a bunch of prisoners who had been in the hospital in the area been injured when their planes crashed and that. And they took us down to the train station, put us on the train. Actually, I didn't know where we were going. We were going into Germany. And I got on the train with a British officer. He was a fighter pilot, had been blown out of his plane. He got a direct hit, and he was unconscious. He woke up, and the force of the explosion had opened his parachute for him, which means he'd been saved that way. So and he had all the, but because of the explosion, he had all the skin burned. He had second-degree burns. He'd been in the hospital for 6 months, and his skin was all pink. And all I can remember is he was a redhead, and he was actually a captain. I forget what they call them, flight lieutenants in the Royal Air Force. So he tells me we have to escape from the train, which wasn't my cup of tea. But officers are supposed to never be. They're supposed to the minute you're not captured, you're just in, they got a name for it. You're just not active duty at the time. You're always fighting to get away. So we tried to get out that night out the window when we got to the Belgian border and in the dark to escape. And the German guard caught us, and he didn't shoot us, but he hit me in the back and knocked me down. And the British officer was in front of me, and the German officer came in and says, "Any more nonsense out of you two?" He wasn't going to cut our throats, but he's going to shoot us. So it's not cause any commotion on his train. So then I was taken to interrogation center for Air Force personnel. It's in Oberursel. It was called Stalag Luft. Stalag Luft was the name of it. Luft mean, of course, air. You know, the Luftwaffe is the Air Force. And you're locked in solitary confinement there for 4 days. I was locked in solitary confinement. You don't talk to anybody. You don't see anybody. They shove your, well, they don't give you a meal again. I was on a piece of black bread in the morning and a bowl of watery soup at noon and a piece of black bread at night. And I hate to think of what the prisoners of Vietnam went through when they were locked in solitary for years. I'm surprised they survived. I don't know if I could have survived it. Well, anyway, about the 4th or 5th day, they took me out and took me up to this room. Beautiful room, looked like a boardroom in one of your big companies in the United States. all oak furniture and everything. And I'm sitting there. The German soldier brought me and sat me down, and the door opens, and in comes this tall, blonde German guy, all dressed in a black uniform with all kind of medals and everything on it. And I don't know if he was Gestapo or SS or what he was, actually. But he did the same thing. He started, he said, "Do you want some cognac?" I said, "No." And I said, "I'd like a glass of water," because I hadn't had any water. And he brought me in some bottled water, and that was good. He asked me if I wanted a cigarette, and actually I didn't smoke. I've never smoked, so I didn't take the cigarette. Again, he hands me a Red Cross form again, and of course I just said, "Well, I can only give you my name, rank, and serial number." He said, "Well, if you don't tell us what we want to know," he said, "we're going to keep you here." Well, our intelligence officers had told us they knew all about this place because it was organized in 42 and now it's 44. It's been there for 2 years. They told us if we said anything, they'd keep us there because they figured we'd keep talking and tell them what they wanted to know. He said, "If you don't talk, you'll be out of there in a hurry," which is what I wanted to be, out of there in a hurry. So I told him, he was nice. I mean, he didn't get nasty or anything. He said, he handed me a book. He said, "Well, we know what time you took off this morning. We know where your air base is and everything else." He said, "We don't, you know." And I said, "Well, that's nice. So what else can I do for you, you know?" So he sent me back down, and sure enough, the next morning, I was taken out front, and there was a bunch of other Air Force officers, and we were taken up to, not far from there, we were taken to a place, a camp. It was actually they put us in tents in this camp, and we were waiting for another train. And they put us on a train, and then I wound up at Stalag Luft III, which was the home of the Great Escape, where 76 British officers escaped in March of 44. They caught 3 of them got away, got back home. One was an Australian. I forget what the other boys were. They were all British Air Force officers, though. There was no Americans, to my recollection. 23 got caught near the camp and returned to Stalag Luft III. 50 of them got far enough away and out that Hitler told the Gestapo when they picked them up, when they rounded them up, to take them out in the field and shoot them, which is exactly what they did. They just shot them down. Something like the Normandy massacre, where they shot I don't know how many American GIs that they had captured, the German army. But this was the Gestapo that shot these fellas. And then I was there. This Stalag Luft III was under the Luftwaffe, had been there since '42, and we did get Red Cross parcels in, and they did give us potatoes and that to cook. We had little stoves in these barracks. There was 8 men to a room. There were two bunks, four different bunks with their double upper and lower. Of course, we had a lot of bed bugs in that, and we had laid on straw, and there was wood. There was burlap filled with straw that were used as a mattress. It wasn't very comfortable, but it was better than most of the camps. So, and we did play basketball. We played softball. Believe it or not, we had a band there. Now you're going to ask me who did this, and this was the International YMCA in Geneva, Switzerland, which was their headquarters, and they were allowed. They had a lot of influence with the Germans. Of course, I found out later that they were taking Hitler's gold in and saving it for him. So, but they were a neutral country, and they were allowed a lot of leeway, and they would send all these things into us. So I kept playing sports, and we started a little theater group, and I was in that. I sang. I had a little program in prison camp to entertain the fellas, because that's the biggest trouble with prison camp, is not knowing what the next day is going to bring. You don't know whether they're going to shoot you. You don't know whether they're going to move you. You don't know what's going to happen, or anything could happen. So I kept busy that way and reading books, which I didn't really do in civilian life. I read a lot of books. We had a library there, also stocked by the International YMCA, and I was there in January of well, let me put it this way, we thought we were going to be home by Christmas, because we knew we had a contraband radio in prison camp, which we had a lot of smart people, not me, in camp, engineers, graduate engineers that had gone through college and that. They had a crystal set, which they used to assemble in this room and bring in the British broadcast. The Germans were monitoring it and knew we were getting broadcasts into the camp, but they never could find it, because at the end of the session they'd take the crystal set all apart into little pieces, and was sewn into our pants. The guys would carry around, and then at a certain time of the day they would go to this one room. These engineers would assemble the crystal set and get the British broadcasts and then disassemble it, and they had been doing that for years, and the Germans had never found the radio. In January of '45, the Russians got within 19 miles of us. They got to the Oder River, which is only 19 miles from our camp, and at 9:30 one night, the colonel got us all in the theater and told us we were moving out. The Germans were moving us out, and we were going to go. He didn't know where we were going, but we were going to go out, and it was snow, and it was about 5 above zero, and we could only take what we could carry. So I had taken some sugar cubes, which I had put away, and some prunes, and I think the sugar cubes saved my life, because the doctor had once told me to save sugar cubes because it's quick energy. And they put us out on the road marching. There was, I think, 6,000 or 8,000 of us in 3 separate, I can't remember whether either the first out of the camp or the second, but they marched us for 65 miles to a railhead. But we would march at night, and we'd rest during the day, because they'd march at night because they didn't want to. The Americans had planes up there, the fighter planes. I'm glad they did that, because the fighter planes wouldn't know that we were POWs, because they had no way of knowing, and they would have figured we were German soldiers in company form, and probably shot us all up. So we got this railhead, and they took us down They put us in box cars. They put 60 people in a box car where they're only supposed to put 40. We couldn't sit down. We couldn't. If you went to the bathroom, you just went in your clothes. They would let us out for about 2 minutes, but a couple of times during it. But a lot of people had to go before that. And of course, we had no food really. They didn't bring us any food or anything. No water. I don't know how long we were in the box cars, but we got to Moosburg, and they put us in tents, horses had been in there, and of course the place was loaded with fleas and everything. And at Moosburg, it was a prison camp they had built for 15,000 prisoners, and there were 75,000 of us there. Free French, Hungarian soldiers who I didn't even know were in the war. The British were there, ground troops, Air Force, any kind you could think of. They were all gathered there. The Germans were putting them all there. For what reason, I don't know, as hostages or whatever. So, on April the 29th, well, we knew the troops were close because they were bringing in GIs with their helmets still on, so we knew the troops were close. And this one GI told us they were only about 20 miles away. It was Patton's Third Army. And on April 29th, we were outside in the yard, and two P-51s came by, fighter planes, and came right down and started shooting at the guard boxes, and had taken out the guard boxes. And of course, we waved to them, and all of a sudden, we saw the tanks coming over the hill, and and all hell broke loose. So, I mean, not having been in the air and not used to war on the ground, it really startles you. So, we watched it actually, because they were shooting. They weren't shooting into the camp or anything. When a couple of shells landed close, which, you know, it's like today anywhere in Iraq, you have somebody gets killed by friendly fire because everything isn't perfect. So we went back into the buildings. We'd be safer in there. But it only took about an hour and a half or 2 hours, and there was an SS battalion there. That's all it was holding on, and they went back across the little river, was in back of Moosburg, and then the American Army came in. They ran the tanks right through the gates, and they came in, and we were liberated. But what they did was they told us there was a lot of SS stragglers in the area with guns, and they didn't want us outside the camp, but they changed the guards. They took away the German guards. They put MPs on the gates, and we didn't eat much better because these troops that were coming through, it was the 14th Armored and the 99th Infantry. I think the second day, General Patton came in himself with his pearl-handled revolvers and went into the barracks, and he saw a Red Cross parcel. He said, how long is this supposed to last you? We said, a week. He said, that's not enough for a man to eat. I said, we know that, sir. And he left and went on. He was going down to Munich, and he liberated, that's when he liberated Dachau, the concentration camp. Well, anyway, the second day after we liberated, this lieutenant came to me and he said, do you want to leave here? And I knew the fellow pretty well. Bill Perkinson, his name was. And I said, what do you got in mind? He said, well, I found an Army captain came in looking for his brother. He's with a field artillery outfit just outside of camp, but he couldn't find his brother, so I asked him if he'd take us out of camp, and he said, well, won't they let you out? And we said, no, they want you to stay in. So he said, I don't care. So Perkinson and I, we got in the Jeep, and he took us out to the field artillery. They put us up for the night, and we got the first good food, American food we've had. They made us scrambled eggs and bacon. I mean, we really enjoyed ourselves. The next morning, we took off hitchhiking to Paris. And we wound up in Paris the day before VE Day, May the 8th. We got there May the 7th. We found another bunch of stragglers from our camp that had done the same thing we did, left camp. we all got together. We found a hotel they had in France to put up recovered Allied military personnel because they were, they were straggling from all kind of camps, prisoners of war. So we were put up in this hotel, and then we went to, then he took us by train to Camp Lucky Strike, and from there we boarded a boat, and I got back to the United States on right around Memorial Day of 1945.
Now, when you came home, what was it like? How did you find your country and town?
Well, I was met at the train. I took the train up from New York. They took us to Fort Dix. I shouldn't say that. They took us to Fort Dix, and we were given a physical exam and that. And then we were sent home. We were given 30 days at home, and then I was told to report to the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Atlantic City for 30 days rest and rehabilitation. When I got home, when I got to the station in Catskill, my mother and father came down from Cairo, the Legionnaires came down, and some of the town councilmen who knew me, of course, because I was one of the first ones that got home. The prisoners of war came home with the wounded. They sent us home before actually the troops were still in Germany, and we were still fighting the Pacific War, so they weren't sending anybody home. In fact, some of those poor boys in Europe, I heard, were resent to the South Pacific. Of course, it didn't last long. I mean, that was I was when I went back to Atlantic City. But when I got home, of course, everybody said hello, and and I was everybody was great. It's not like the Vietnam War. That's World War II. Everybody was behind you, which made it a lot easier. So, but anyway, I was down in when we went to Atlantic City. We asked this colonel, "Now, what are you going to do with us?" And he said, "Well, we're going to send you to Texas, retrain you, and send you to the Pacific." And we said, "Oh no, we don't want to be a prisoner of the Japanese. No way," because the death rate in German camps, as I think they've cataloged, it was about 10-15%, whereas the death rate in the Japanese camps was 40 to 50%. In other words, a lot more killed over there or died or whatever happened to them. They worked them to death, or they died because they didn't give them any medical attention. And then while I was down in Atlantic City, of course, they dropped the atom bomb on Hiroshima, and then a few days later, I forget where it was, they dropped it on Nagasaki, and then the Japanese surrendered. Of course, then they changed their mind about us. They said, "Well, if you got enough points, you can get out." So, and I had enough points, so I decided to get out. Another thing is, as a bombardier, I go to bombardier reunions. I belong to the bombardiers. I'm going to be the commander of the Northeast chapter of the American Ex-Prisoners of War. I belong to the Stalag Luft III organization, prisoner of war organization, and I go to all the reunions, and I belong to the 8th Air Force. So.
Now, you mentioned you were the bombardier, but what did you do? Look out a window and just drop bombs? Or did you have some device?
You have a Norden Bomb site, which is up in the front of the plane. In B-24s, we had a nose turret, which you didn't have in the B-17, so I was underneath the nose turret. I had a little window there with a Norden Bomb site.
How accurate was your bombing?
Norden Bomb site is very accurate, from 25,000 feet, which is normally, we usually bomb from 20 to 25,000 feet, the heavy bombers. Medium bombers were more down in the 10 to 12,000 foot range, and I guess they used the Norden too. It was very accurate. We trained on it, and in bombardier school we trained in twin-engine AT-11s. We had the same bomb sight in that, but we'd bombed from about 12,000. We weren't up in the from 12,000. We had a circle that we used on the ground when we were training, and a shack in the middle, which we used to call the shack. And many of the time, from 12,000 feet, I've put the bomb, which were black powder bombs. They just had black powder, and they didn't do anything but make make dust so you could. We had a camera there because would take pictures of your bombing run, because your accuracy is what said if you weren't accurate. We washed out a lot of fellows in bombardier school that they just weren't accurate, whatever they was. I always said the Norden Bomb site was the first computer, because we didn't actually drop the bombs like you see like there was no trigger like this or anything like that. There was a trigger on the machine on the Norden Bomb site. You'd set in all the computations that you needed, which is the wind, which has, will blow the bomb or whatever. If you bomb in a vacuum, of course the bomb lands directly under the plane, but because of the wind, you're up here and your bomb's landing back here. So you had to put that trail in the sight. Now, if you get the wind and everything, you can tell how far back it's going to land. So you put all these computations into the Norden Bomb site, and then you have a sight there that picks up the target in the crosshairs, which there is on the bomb site. And you have to do it two ways. You have to do it this way and this way. So it stays right there while your plane is going. It has to stay right on the target. If you think you got it, then you lift up the trigger, and then these little indices there, when they cross, sends electrical impulse back to the shackles where the bombs hang on, and the shackles open up and the bombs drop out. Now they're piled one on top of the other, and they're rigged so the top one can't come out before they come out in sequence. So it's quite an operation.
While you were in the prison camp, did the Germans do anything to try to get you to come on their side?
Oh yes, near the end of the war, they sent this pamphlet in asking us to join the German army, because they were telling us that the communists are bad people, and that sooner or later that they'll try to take over our country too, and that if we join the German army and fight on the Russian front, they would send us back through Switzerland after we spent 6 months on the Russian front fighting the Russians, which of course nobody was going to do, so that didn't go very far.
Now, did you have any special kinds of identification when you were in the prison camp, and did you have to produce it every day or so?
Yes, this is a file the German Luftwaffe had on me, which they had on most Air Force men, because of the escaping. It's almost like it's a picture, how tall you are, your weight, and they also have a fingerprint of you. And I got this when we were liberated. We broke into German headquarters and we got our files out, and I happened to get mine. Everybody didn't get theirs, but I got mine, so.
Tell us a little bit more about that great escape. What kind of conditions were you under there? How tight was the security, and how were they able to pull such a thing off?
Well, they were always looking for tunnels, the Germans. They had what we call ferrets running around the camp. They had long handled sticks, metal sticks or prongs. They would stick in the ground looking for, if you pull it up, usually the dirt comes up with it. If the dirt falls through, they know underneath there something's going on. The tunnels were were dug under the stoves. We had stoves, but they found out they could move the blocks under the stoves, and that's where they started to dig. And of course, the Great Escape happened 3 months before I got there. It was March of '44. However, they were digging after they were. The problem with the Great Escape was they were going to get 200 men out, they thought, but somebody figured wrong, and where they came up, they were supposed to come up in the pine forest, which surrounded the prison camp, the barracks and that. Instead, they were 10 feet short, so they came up right by a guard box and a searchlight, and that's why the Germans found them before they got all the men out. So but they started digging 3 tunnels. They had 3 tunnels going because they wanted them to find the other tunnels and leave the other one that was really the escape route. They left that alone, so they made it so they could find the other tunnels, and they figured that was the only one they had going, but they didn't. And actually, I guess they had another tunnel going when I was there, which I knew nothing about. So, however, they had a secret organization in camp. Well, we did have a security officer, a German security officer, who just died a few years ago. He wrote a book after the war, and one of our officers, a colonel who's now retired, a lieutenant general, kept in touch with him. And he couldn't get him to come over. He tried to get him to come to the United States to one of our prison camp reunions, but he wouldn't come over. But he did write a book and made some money in Germany after the war, and he just died a few years ago. So, but we did have a secret organization, and after I was there a couple of months, this major came to me and said, "Coley, would you like to work for us?" And I said, "For who?" He said, "X." He said, "What's X?" He says, "It's a secret organization in camp." I said, "It must be secret because I didn't know anything about it until you told me." And I said, "What do you want?" And so he put me in this room. We had a gate where the German guards used to come in during the day. And I'd sit in this barracks where I had a window that looked out on the gate. And if 25 guards came in the morning, at night I'd want to make sure 25 went out. If only 24 went out, there was one German guard in camp. He'd probably speak perfect English. He'd go into one of the barracks, change his uniform, and put on either American or British clothing, and was circulating to find out what was going on in camp. That was one of their secret operations, so, which we knew about. So that's the way we counted it. And that's what I did while I was there until we were taken out of camp. So, but the security was, well, we had guard boxes on the corners with machine guns and that, and we had barbed wire. You had 2 sections of barbed wire. You had an outside section, inside section, and inside that was all rolls of barbed wire. So if you got over the one wire fence, you're down into a bunch of barbed wire anyway, so there weren't many escapes, you know what I mean? You weren't allowed to escape. You had to go through a chain of command. We had a chain of command, and your senior officers were in charge of the camp. It wasn't that everybody was on their own. The senior officers ran the camp, the colonels that we had there. We had a lot of colonels, lieutenant colonels, majors, and we wound up with one Brigadier General Vanneman near just before we were pulled out of Stalag Luft III. In other words, he came in later than I did. So.
Now, do you have guard dogs also?
Oh, in the evening, yeah, we had German Shepherds and Doberman Pinschers, Dobermans. And these were all trained to kill. I mean, they were. They'd leave those. They'd put those loose in the camp at night. Of course, we had to close. We had to shutter everything. We couldn't have windows open during the night or anything. It was all closed in at night. Then they leave those guard dogs loose. So if anybody stepped outside, I remember one time it was the barracks next to us. They told us about it the next day. One of the fellows didn't. He went out to close the thing, and they must have had the dog in there already. The shepherd drove up and almost got his arm. I don't know why they didn't close the thing. They know they're supposed to close it right away. So.
Did you have to survive the war in the prison camp in your uniform? Did they provide you with prison garb or what?
I had, well, I didn't tell you that. That's one thing I like about the Salvation Army. Red Cross did send in Red Cross parcels of food, but when I got to this one camp after I was shot down, that was that camp after the interrogation center, where they did give us some food, the Germans then. That was the end of black bread in the morning and watery soup at noontime. I got to look at myself in the mirror. I must have lost 15 pounds from the time I was shot down in a couple of weeks. I looked in the mirror. Of course, I hadn't seen anything. I hadn't washed my face. I hadn't done anything. And I had a beard, and I looked in the mirror. I couldn't even recognize myself. It's very scary, you know. But we did get a box with a field jacket in it, an Army field jacket in it, and shaving stuff, and toothpaste and a toothbrush from the Salvation Army. And to this day, I send checks every couple of months to the Salvation Army. They send me a letter from Albany here, the outfit up here, and I send the money every time they send me a letter. So, but they were very good. So.
How was your adjustment back into civilian life, at least from the armed forces?
Well, I had a problem with being shut in, like in an elevator and even in a car. Sometimes I get a little freaked out. I didn't understand it, and I don't know. I drank a lot. That summer, my mother was very worried because I was out drinking, and in fact, they told you not to do that, and not to eat fatty foods and all this other stuff, because they said our stomachs had to adjust. Your stomach shrinks when you don't eat, which I found in prison camp. And if you eat too much, you guess you could die. I don't know, but when I got home, of course, I ate everything, and I drank, which I'm not proud of, but just one of those things. You go out and you sort of get away from, you know, you don't think about it. I don't know. They told me here I had never asked the government for anything till I was 70 years old. And when I got up here, when I got in this prisoner of war outfit, they said, what kind of compensation are you getting? I said, in fact, I'd never used the Veterans Hospital here until I was 7. And I said, compensation for what? He said, well, did you get hurt or anything? And I said, well, I got hurt when I bailed out of my aircraft and landed on a French farmhouse and got my shoulder banged up my back. And I said I had it x-rayed after the war, not by the government, but by a local hospital, and they couldn't find anything. They found some discoloration, but they couldn't find anything. So when I got here, they let me know my shoulder rotator cuff was disintegrating or whatever it was, which is where I hit. This service officer for the POWs sent me for a protocol exam, and they found out I had PTSD. I didn't want to go see it. They said, you have to see the psychiatrist. I said, I don't want to see the psychiatrist. And they said, well, if you're going to, this is part of the examination. So I went in, and the psychiatrist, we sat there, and he started taking me back, and all of a sudden I started crying. I said, what the hell's wrong with me, you know? I couldn't understand it. And so I wiped my eyes, and I said to this guy, I said, I think I'm all right now, we can go on. He said, no, we're all finished now. Then they told me I had post-traumatic stress disorder, which after the war I used to have dreams sometime bailing out of the plane and the chute not opening. Of course, I'd wake up just before I hit the ground. So, but and then I had dreams of, like you're standing off and you're watching this, of soldiers coming through a woods or something, and you're there and you're afraid they're going to catch you or something. I don't know. And then you wake up. I mean, it's odd. It's.
Now, while you were in the prison camp, did you have any opportunities for them to provide medical care, or were you left to your own resources?
Well, they had an aid station, but they didn't really have any. And we were one of the better ones. I mean, the enlisted men, my gunners were up in Stalag Luft IV, and of course they made some of them work. They could, but they didn't have even what we had, so I don't know. We didn't really have anything to speak of. There was an aid station there, but outside of that, they had a hospital. If anybody was really bad, they'd take you out to the hospital.
Did you make any long-time lasting friendships? Do you still correspond with them, meet with them?
Yes, well, one of my friends One of my friends just died, Norman Grant. He belonged to the Stalag Luft III POWs. I used to meet him at the reunions and also at the 8th Air Force reunions. I was good friends. Vinnie Garbone was my best friend. He died at age 59 from a brain aneurysm. He lived in Yonkers, and I used to see him after the war. We kept in touch. My crew and that, what you're talking about, prison camp. Well, I used to meet the colonels and that who I knew, and some of the other fellas, but there was nobody lived near me. So actually, the only time I saw them, actually, a lot of them lived in California, lived in Texas. The preponderance in the Air Force seemed to be from the South and Texas and California. The Northeast was in a minority in the Air Force.
What about any of your original crew? How many are surviving?
My flight engineer is still alive. He lives in Pennsylvania, in Allentown, and I've seen him quite a few times. In fact, he got me in the POW organization. He'd been in it for years after the war. And he lives in Allentown. I have a radio operator I'm in touch with on the phone, and also he lives in California. I haven't seen him, but we correspond on that, and we talk on the telephone. So the rest of the group I haven't been able to find. I finally found my navigator through the internet and through the computers. I don't have a computer, so I went to somebody else and he helped me out. I found him, but I was 10 years too late. I found out he died way before, I got a hold of his widow, who said he was from Detroit, and they were living in a small town outside of Detroit. I got his widow, and she said if I ever got in the air, I'd stop by. She'd like to talk to me and that. But the other ones I haven't really. Well, one of the crew, I haven't gotten a hold of him. He lives out in Idaho or somewhere. He stayed in. He was a ball turret gunner, and he stayed in the Air Force and he's a retired lieutenant colonel. So, and he was a sergeant on our crew, one of the gunners. I tried to find my tail gunner, who was from North Carolina, but I called the town. There's no record of anybody by that name. I figured he might have had a son, would still be around. But some of the other ones I can't seem to find them. I haven't tried the internet with them, but
now, many ex-prisoners of war don't like to speak of their experiences. Have you found it helpful to speak and to be in the organizations, or not?
Oh yes, the organizations are great.
And what do you do?
Because we've all been through the same thing, and we all try to help each other. And
what did you do? How did you get back into civilian life upon your discharge from the Army? What did you do? Did you go on to college, or go right back to work?
No, when we first got home, of course I lived in a small town in Cairo. They were giving the soldiers a year, well, you can call it unemployment, you can call it whatever you wanted to. It was called a 52-20 club. It was for 52 weeks, you got $20 a week. Well, I was on that. I got home in the fall, and most of the guys were getting this $20, but they were doing nothing with their lives, And I think we had to check in with the unemployment office anyway. I think that's the way it worked. I found out Central Hudson was hiring people to run a line to help. It was chopping down trees and stuff like that. It was actually physical labor, which I didn't care. So I decided, the guys are all asking me, "Are you crazy? You're going back to work?" I said, "You think I want to sit around and drink beer with you fellas?" I went to work. It was 5 days a week. You got $42. That was in 1946, I think it was, the fall of '46. And then I decided I wanted to go to college, which I was supposed to have time coming. So my brother got home, and he went back to work in a drugstore. He was in the Pacific. He was in the infantry. And I did go to college the next year, but then I was in love with a girl, and I came back from college, and we got married. I stayed out of college that year. I was going to go back in the fall, and I went back, but we had an automobile accident on my honeymoon, and that killed it. I went back to New York State, and I stayed as meat business as a salesman for 35 years in the wholesale meat business, which is what I knew through my father being in the meat business.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your
Okay.
interesting story.
All right.